Hey guys, welcome back to Wrestling News 365. Hope everyone is doing very well. As always, there is a ton of news stories to get into today. So let's talk about Impact Wrestling, and let's start off talking about Matt Cardona, because he has provided an update about his contractual situation with Impact Wrestling. The GCW World Champion is still a free agent. Now, Matt Cardona has been featured prominently on Impact Wrestling lately. Of course, his partner, Chelsea Green, is now with the company. They had a match at Slammiversary. He's had a recent feud with his former tag team partner and real-life best friend, Brian Myers, too, but he is a free agent still. Matt Cardona appeared on the Wrestling Perspective podcast and gave updates as to his contractual status as of right now. And the GCW World Champion revealed that he is currently not signed to any contract. He hasn't signed a contract with Impact Wrestling or any promotion, and he could, quote, show up anywhere and would love to bounce around. This is what he had to say, quotes, "I hate using the term free agent, but I guess I technically am. Impact has been awesome. Impact is my priority right now, but I don't have a contract there, so I guess I could show up anywhere. I would love just to bounce around, but Impact is somewhere I feel I have a lot of opportunity, and as soon as I got there, I felt welcome there. I felt like it was a great place to be." Now, Cardona continued, drawing parallels between himself and Impact Wrestling. He concluded by saying he feels that Impact Wrestling is the perfect spot for him. He said, quote, "I feel like Matt Cardona and Impact, our paths have kind of been parallel, where there have been highs and lows and highs and lows, and people have counted me out and Impact out, but I feel we're both on the up and up, and that's why I feel like Impact is the perfect spot for me right now." So, whilst Cardona hasn't signed a contract with Impact Wrestling, it doesn't look like he's going to be moving from there anytime soon. Now, to people that there's the people that are not familiar with this channel, or familiar that have watched the videos that I've done in the past here, they would know that this isn't really anything new when it comes to Impact Wrestling and how they do business and how they do their contracts, because Impact Wrestling essentially has this kind of a unique and certainly atypical for a larger promotion in the United States, or certainly North America, where they'll make these deals with these talents. They'll make these deals with talents where they'll say, look, you can come in, and because we're desperate to have a Matt Cardona. They did it with James Storm. They did it with Alex Shelley. We're desperate to have these kind of talents in the company, and we understand that you don't want to be tied down. We understand that you might not want to be exclusive to Impact Wrestling, but we're desperate to have you on the show, and we're desperate to have you as part of the promotion. So, come in, work a taping, see how you feel. Come in, work a couple of tapings, and we'll play it by ear. We'll keep it from there. And it would appear that as of right now, Matt Cardona is just on a handshake deal, and every taping he goes to, it's a case of, you want to come back to the next taping? Great, you'll come back to the next taping, and you'll do it and carry on. That's how it's worked for, I would say, like 90% of the people that have come into Impact Wrestling over the course of, certainly through the pandemic, but over the course of the last sort of 18 months, 2 years or so. W. Morrissey, he did an interview recently where he essentially said the same thing. He said, when I came in April, I worked a couple of matches. I did that for a while. Then eventually I signed a contract. That's up after Bound for Glory. If I'll stay there, I don't know. Alex Shelley, when he was working there with the Motor City Machine Guns, with Chris Sabin, when they came back last year, he didn't have any contract. He said, I didn't have any agreement. I didn't have anything in writing. It was a handshake, verbal deal as to, can you come in for the next taping, or can you be available for the next 2-3 tapings? Sure. If not, don't worry. Something will come up. We'll shift it there. Even people like Eric Young and Deonna Purrazzo, that now do have contracts with Impact Wrestling. Initially, when they came in, they were similar. They were just on a handshake, per appearance kind of deal, or a verbal deal. Deonna Purrazzo, she came in. She was actively the Knockouts champion, and she still didn't have a contract with the company. She was almost like petitioning for it on social media, if you recall last year, that she won the Knockouts Championship, and she was asked by fans on social media, what's going on? Are you going to stay? What's the situation with you in Impact Wrestling? Is there any status? Are you going to sign a contract? And she would openly say, I don't know. I hope so. I hope I stick with Impact Wrestling. I like it here. I'm the Knockouts champion, and hopefully we can work towards that, but that hasn't been agreed yet. And eventually, of course, she did sign a contract, and things did get sorted out, but that was the situation then. Eric Young's another great example. He came in at Slammiversary last year, didn't have a contract with Impact Wrestling, was working on a verbal deal, a per appearance deal, a handshake deal, or whatever. He got red hot very, very quickly because of the angle he had with Rich Swann. He got red hot right away, and they put the World Championship on him, and by putting the World Championship on him, he signed a contract, and now he's with Impact Wrestling. He's got a contract with them. So that was the situation with Eric Young. So that's basically Impact Wrestling's hiring policy. And I recall I mean, Matt Cardona made his debut, if you will, with Impact Wrestling in January this year at Hard to Kill, I think. And even then, he said, I haven't signed a deal. And ever since really leaving WWE, he's been very vocal about not wanting to be tied down to an exclusive long-term contract or anything like that. That's why the AEW situation happened how it happened. He came in with AEW, signed a contract that was maybe like 6 appearances or something like that. 6 appearance deal that was basically through the summer, and then he worked the All Out event. And he even said at the time, I signed a really short contract with them because I don't want to be tied down. I want to have my options open. I want to have certain options available to me. I don't want to be exclusive to anyone. And that was the situation there. And not that with AEW there's exclusivity, because they're not. If anything, they're very open. You can work with Impact. You can work with New Japan. You can do independent dates as long as they don't clash with AEW, certain talents and all that kind of stuff. But obviously he felt that he didn't want to be tied into a long-term contract or anything like that. And that's why the AEW situation didn't really go anywhere. And personally, at the time when he showed up in AEW, for me, I never truly felt that was the right place for him, even though he was actually more featured than I thought he would be. Certainly for, how he was being booked on WWE television for a long period of time. Because he was in matches with Cody, he was involved with the Dark Order. I don't know if he had a match against Brody Lee, but he was involved in a tag team match against Brody Lee at All Out last year. All that kind of stuff. He was heavily involved. And at the time I thought, well, good for him, because I didn't see him really shining in AEW. I didn't see him really rising up the ranks there. If he was there now, I would see him maybe on an occasional episode of Dynamite. He'd be involved in a faction of some point, there's no doubt about that. But mainly I would see him on something like Dark or Dark Elevation. And I think he realizes that and thought, you know what? I might as well just be in Impact Wrestling if that's the case, right? I might as well just be somewhere where I can be featured and I am going to be featured more prominently. And Matt Cardona in Impact Wrestling, as he said, I think is a better fit for him. I mentioned it when he was released by WWE in April last year, that it was the best place for him because that realistically is a place where there's potential for him to win the World Championship there, if the gimmick's right. I still think there are things to change about Matt Cardona. I would like to see more of the GCW version of Matt Cardona in Impact Wrestling, and maybe we'll get more of that, where he kind of plays up to his WWE past and becomes a heel. I just think the Matt Cardona we've seen in Impact Wrestling is no different from the Zack Ryder we saw in WWE for however many years. And, it's 2021. We need to see something different. That's why the GCW stuff has been so successful for him, because it's such a departure from what he was doing in the past. And I think he needs to do that in Impact Wrestling. Whether or not we'll see that with him being paired up, of course, with Chelsea Green and Impact and all that kind of stuff, time will tell. But it's interesting that he notes that he hasn't signed a contract. But realistically, he's not going anywhere, I don't think, anytime soon. I think he'll continue to do stuff outside of Impact, like GCW, like independent shows if they do open up. I know it's a bit of a confusing situation right now when it comes to the pandemic, but I don't see him departing Impact Wrestling anytime soon or going to Ring of Honor or anything like that. Maybe if part of a working relationship, maybe he does appear in an NWA or an ROH or an MLW or something like that. Time will tell, though. I think he's very happy where he is in Impact Wrestling right now. Speaking of Cardona as well, this was an interesting point that he mentioned, that he made more money selling his in-ring gear for that GCW Homecoming event than he did for his actual match against Nick Gage. That's how crazy it is. So he appeared on a recent episode of the Oral Sessions with Renee Paquette podcast, and Cardona discussed numerous topics, including the fallout from his match against Nick Gage at GCW Homecoming. And he mentioned there was no medical team to check on him as blood was pouring from his wounds, which I know people will say that's terrible, but that, unfortunately, with independent events, which GCW is, for independent events and for deathmatch events, sometimes that's kind of par for the course, which is why it's risky, which is why you have to be careful. I would have thought, given GCW's got a bit of notoriety at this point, that they could have had that there, but that's concerning. Matt Cardona said he turned out to be the fortunate one as he came across a nurse and his friend. Both helped him out with his medical requirements. He said, quote, "Believe it or not, there's no medical staff backstage at GCW. Luckily, there was a nurse who did stitch me up a bit, but all of my slices and wounds were exposed. Luckily, my friend, Giancarlo, had a hotel room and he let me use a shower off. He then taped towels to me so I could fly home. He dressed me. I went through airport security like that, and I flew right to Anaheim for Disneyland. I was bleeding out on this flight. I would dry, and as I would move, they would rip open again, and there was blood everywhere. I had to go to a hotel and get cleaned up. I took a bath, and I looked like I was stabbed or had stabbed somebody." I guess, again, that's deathmatch wrestling, but I don't know how I feel about not having medical staff backstage. That is that's got to be alarming, right? That's certainly, I'm not the only one that thinks that. If you're going to be cutting yourself open with light tubes and glass and all that kind of stuff, can we at least have someone that can do stitches backstage, right? I mean, surely that's the right thing. Because even in that episode of Dark Side of the Ring with Nick Gage, where he has that tournament of death and he gets the really, what would have been a fatal puncture. I mean, he did die on that helicopter. There was at least someone there putting pressure on the wound and trying to stop the blood, stop him bleeding out. So I don't know. That again, I don't know how I truly feel about that at all. That does seem quite concerning to me. But what is interesting about all of that is Matt Cardona added that he earned more money by selling his in-ring gear from the death match than he did for the actual match itself. He said, "I sold all my bloody gear for big bucks, baby. I sold the boots, the wrist tape, the gloves, the pants, the shirts, all sold separately. I made more than I got paid for the match. I got paid a lot for the match, but that's how much the stuff was going for. I don't control the market, it's supply and demand," which I guess just shows like pro wrestling memorabilia is a really lucrative market, whether it's ring canvases, whether it's gear, whether it's whatever. WWE had that show, that Most Wanted Treasures or whatever it is, and there's a big market for it because a lot of the stuff it's one off. You have these NFTs recently, right? And I just still don't really get all that kind of NFT stuff, but that's the original NFT, right? In-ring gear that was worn once for one match. That's the gear that he wore for that match on that night, on that occasion. You can't replicate that. That's unique. That's why pro wrestling memorabilia is so lucrative if you get the right stuff. And I'm sure over in 10, 15 years' time, having Matt Cardona's bloody shirts from that day in GCW will be a big deal. So interesting to see who bought it and who's probably got it now hanging somewhere on their wall. Mickie James, of course, the executive producer for NWA Empower, which is coming up soon. Mickie James has continued to express her desire to get in the ring with the current Knockouts champion, Deonna Purrazzo. Now, in an interview with TK Trinidad's Women's Wrestling Talk podcast, Mickie James discussed numerous topics, including the possibility of facing Purrazzo, the former WWE Women's Champion. Heaped praise on the current Knockouts champion and stated that Purrazzo has grown a lot as a performer. She said, quote, "I would love to face her. I think what she's been able to do since she showed up in Impact is incredible. And I think she's been able to redefine herself and really kind of evolve herself now on television. She's done a whole lot and she's going to continue to do a whole lot of things because she's young and she's talented and she's driven and she's an ass kicker and really loves the art of wrestling." So she has continued to tease that she could be facing Deonna Purrazzo. She also mentioned that a dream match, it would be a dream match for her to face Deonna Purrazzo inside of an Impact Wrestling ring. I think that is going to happen. I mentioned this a few times here on the channel at this point. Of course, Deonna Purrazzo isn't facing Mickie James at NWA Empower. She's sticking to that with saying that she's not going to be wrestling that night, Mickie James. She's going to be backstage. She's going to be helping run the show since she's the executive producer of it. But I think Impact Wrestling are hoping, and certainly the working plan is that at some point we will get Mickie James versus Deonna Purrazzo. That's why they're putting this all together. Of course, Impact want to have their Knockouts champion on what is going to be a show of a lot of buzz, like NWA Empower, an all-female pay-per-view. But ultimately, they want Mickie James to come in. And I think maybe it'll be a kind of a deal of, we give you Deonna Purrazzo for Empower, you give us Mickie James. Not that she's contracted to the NWA, but you give us Mickie James, say for Bound for Glory. I wouldn't be surprised in the slightest if finally we see Deonna Purrazzo versus Mickie James happen at Bound for Glory. I think that's probably the working plan as of right now. I don't know whether that to be the factually accurate the case or not, but I think that's the working plan. I think Deonna Purrazzo will beat Melina at NWA Empower. It's for the Knockouts Championship as well, so I don't see Deonna Purrazzo dropping the championship there to Melina. Even though Melina and Impact would certainly be an interesting situation and scenario, it's a lengthy title reign that Deonna Purrazzo has at this point, so I would be very, very surprised, very, very surprised if she dropped the championship to Melina at NWA Empower, so I don't see that. But I do think that Mickie James versus Deonna Purrazzo is inevitable. I think it happens inside of an Impact Wrestling ring. As I mentioned, I think it probably happens, most likely happens at Bound for Glory in October, considering that all of these promotions are working on that show, whether it is Impact, AAA, AEW, New Japan, maybe it's going to be the NWA as well. So maybe that's the situation they'll go into there. But I think Mickie James versus Deonna Purrazzo happens later this year in October. Finally, Jordynne Grace has spoken about why she re-signed with Impact Wrestling and decided to sign with Impact over AEW and Impact. Now, of course, Jordynne Grace renewed her Impact Wrestling contract earlier this year in May. Now, she has now explained why she decided to re-sign with the company instead of going to a different promotion. She recently sat down with TalkSport for an interview and explained that Impact Wrestling's lighter schedule was ultimately why she decided to re-sign over going to WWE and AEW. She cited WWE's constant training and AEW's weekly show on the road and late night AEW Dark tapings as the reason for not considering those options. The former Knockouts champion stated she isn't in the best place to work a heavy schedule. She said, quote, Impact really is the best place for me. I do not do well right now, at least, with a super heavy schedule, and I feel that's much every other wrestling company I could have signed with realistically. WWE, training constantly, shows. I feel like that's a 24/7 job at that point. AEW, they're on the road on a weekly basis, and I know sometimes they film dark well until the night, 2, 3 a.m., something like that. So I just knew Impact would let me do powerlifting, and it's a much lighter schedule. It's been once a month, but I also do a part-time job transcribing work, so I can do that as well. I don't think I'm willing to sacrifice 100% of other stuff I do in my regular life right now. Maybe one day, who knows, just not today. So that's certainly interesting. I think a lot of people forget that when it comes to Impact Wrestling, as a lot of these guys, again, it's a once a month kind of deal. They fly out for an Impact taping, which is 2, 3, 4, maybe sometimes even 5 days, but usually 2, 3 days. And they have other stuff. They might work independent dates in between that, but a lot of them have other jobs, regular jobs that they work in. Alex Shelley's a great example of that. He's a frontline worker as well. And some people, aren't willing to take that risk. And I thought that Impact Wrestling did a really good job by re-signing Jordynne Grace, because absolutely, there was a demand for Jordynne Grace from WWE and AEW. I think there would have been interest from both companies. But it would appear that realistically, it wasn't a case of, I'm sure money did play into it, but it wasn't really a case of money and these other things. It was just a case of the schedule. And it's funny that AEW has a relatively light schedule. I mean, it's once a week, twice a week now, but it's once a week. They just do the television shows, maybe occasionally a tour, and maybe some of those tapings do go into the night, but that is par for the course. That's what they do. But in comparison to WWE being on the road 5 days a week, constant training at the Performance Center, etc., Impact Wrestling's on the complete other end of the spectrum. And sometimes that makes it difficult to keep wrestlers, because wrestlers want to be doing more. They want to be full-time. They want to be on the road. They want to be in these big arenas. They want to have all this. Whereas Impact Wrestling's on the other end of the spectrum. They're like, look, it's once a month and you can do whatever you want. You don't have to sacrifice your day job. It's a bit of extra money. It's a bit of extra exposure. If you like powerlifting like Jordynne Grace, you can do that. You can do whatever you want. And certainly that played into the hands of Jordynne Grace. So I think that's interesting. And I think that will be interesting as to whenever her contract does come up next. I think the general Impact contract right now is about 2 years if they re-sign. So maybe it's a case of Jordynne Grace signing to Impact for 2 years. I don't know. That's speculation on my part. I don't have the exact details on that. But once it comes up in 2 years' time, it'll be interesting to see once again if Jordynne Grace is interested in working a more heavy schedule. If, again, the Impact Wrestling schedule, for what it is, she likes doing that instead. So that's certainly going to be fascinating as well. But as I mentioned at the time, I think it's a big pickup. I think it's a big signing. I think Jordynne Grace is very, very talented. I think she's incredibly unique and a great wrestler too. So it's a big pickup and a big re-signing for Impact Wrestling. But look, guys, as always, this is just one man's opinion. What are your thoughts on all of these Impact Wrestling news stories you've spoken about today? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. I'll do my best to respond and reply to all of your comments. Really enjoy interacting with you guys here on the channel. If you have enjoyed this video, please do smash a like on the like button too. Really does help us out here on YouTube. Got the rankings and get into people's recommendation feeds, of course, if they haven't seen any of our videos previously. But most importantly, if you haven't already, please do subscribe to Wrestling News 365. You can do that by clicking the bottom right-hand corner of the screen right now. Or if you wait a few seconds, there'll be a subscribe button at the end of this video, along with another video for you to watch. Be sure to click the notification bell. You'll be notified when we go live for live streams, watch-alongs, post-show reactions, and for our daily videos talking about all things WWE, AEW, and Impact Wrestling. Thank you very much for watching, listening, streaming, or have you come across this video today. And I'll speak to you again very, very soon.
Hey guys, thank you for watching, listening, streaming, or however you come across this video today. Be sure to click on the video on the right there to watch our next video, or click the bottom there to subscribe, or the bottom right hand corner. Thank you very much, and I'll speak to you again very soon.